Jason Carter, a Navy veteran, was walking through the busy Dallas airport with Axel, his faithful service dog. The ambient noise was deafening, a symphony of voices, bags being dragged, and the constant announcement of flights. Jason moved cautiously, his eyes attentive to everything around him, a consequence of the years he had spent in combat zones. Axel, a German shepherd trained to help him with his post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, walked beside him, always alert, like an extension of his own body. As he approached the boarding gate, Jason felt a chill run down his spine. Something was about to happen, but he didn't know what. That's when the flight attendant, a woman with a rigid expression and cold eyes, approached him. "Sir, I'm sorry, but your dog can't board," she said in an impersonal voice. Jason froze for a second, trying to process the words. He knew Axel was allowed to board, as he had filled in all the required forms. "He's my service dog. I have the right documentation," he replied, his voice laden with growing tension. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we can't allow animals on board without prior authorization. You'll have to leave the dog here," the flight attendant replied sharply, walking away as if the matter was closed. Jason felt indignant. Leave Axel behind? That wasn't an option. "Either he gets on with me or I'm not going anywhere," he said loudly, attracting the attention of some of the passengers around him. Rachel, a journalist waiting for the same flight, began to pay attention. She saw the tension in the air and Jason's discomfort. She knew that something bigger was going on there. The flight attendant turned around again, now more impatient. "If you don't want to comply, I'll have to call security." As the confrontation intensified, Axel began to act differently. He pulled Jason by the vest with unexpected force, diverting his attention from the argument. Jason turned around, following Axel's gaze, and spotted a small child, crying, apparently lost in the chaos of the airport. Axel approached the little girl carefully, and his presence instantly calmed her down. Jason watched the scene with a mixture of relief and pride, feeling that Axel had once again proved the value of his presence. The flight attendant, now out of arguments, was forced to admit that Axel was, in fact, essential to Jason. Just then, Robert, an executive from a rival airline, who was also watching the scene, approached. "Mr. Carter, I'm Robert from Delta. We have some free seats on the next flight and we've secured Axel's boarding. Please come with me." Jason, still irritated but relieved by the offer, thanked him. It was clear that this was just the start of something bigger, but for now, he had a flight to catch, with Axel by his side. Jason felt the weight of the tension dissipate as he settled into his new seat. Robert, the airline executive, had been more than generous in ensuring that Axel could fly with him and his family. However, as the plane began to prepare for takeoff, Jason noticed something strange. Axel was restless. The German shepherd, who normally lay quietly next to his owner, was agitated, sniffing the air insistently and occasionally emitting a low growl. Jason, always attentive to his dog's signals, began to feel a wave of worry growing in his chest. He leaned over and stroked Axel's head, trying to calm him down. "Everything all right, kid?" Jason murmured, looking around. Axel, however, continued to stare at the back of the cabin, the hairs on the back of his neck bristling slightly. Jason followed the dog's gaze and saw a man sitting alone near the toilet. The man was wearing a hood and seemed extremely nervous, looking around suspiciously. The feeling that something was wrong didn't leave Jason alone. He tried to concentrate on the flight, but Axel wouldn't let him ignore his instincts. After about half an hour in the air, the dog's behavior intensified. He started pulling on his collar, as if to warn Jason that there was imminent danger. It was then that Jason decided to act. He discreetly called one of the flight attendants and explained Axel's behavior. "My dog never acts like that for no reason. I think you should check that passenger," he said, pointing to the man at the back of the cabin. The flight attendant looked at him hesitantly, but the seriousness in Jason's eyes convinced her. She informed the pilot, and a few minutes later, a decision was made. The plane would make an unscheduled landing at a nearby airport. Jason watched carefully as security agents boarded the plane as soon as it touched the ground. The suspicious man was removed from the plane, and shortly afterwards, the truth came out. The authorities discovered that he was carrying illegal substances, hidden in his hand luggage. Axel had sniffed out the contraband long before anyone else suspected it. When the passengers realized what had happened, a wave of relief swept through the cabin. Jason and Axel were quickly recognized as the heroes of the flight. A young couple sitting next to Jason leaned over to say thank you. "You saved us all. Thank you." Jason, however, didn't feel like a hero. For him, Axel was the real savior. As everyone got off the plane, he ran his hand lovingly over the dog. "Good job, buddy," he said with a relieved smile. Despite the momentary relief, Jason knew that this episode only reinforced an uncomfortable truth. The world still didn't understand the priceless value of service dogs, and for Axel's sake, he was determined to change that. When Jason finally arrived in California, he had mixed feelings. He was relieved to be back, but also looking forward to reuniting with his old military unit mates. They had been through so much together, and now, after years, they would meet again. Axel, at Jason's side, seemed to pick up on his owner's tension, remaining as alert as ever. At the meeting point, Jason saw familiar faces. Men who, like him, bore in their eyes the invisible marks of a war that didn't end when they returned home. As he approached, he heard his name being called. "Jason! Jason Carter!" The voice was Mike's, one of his best friends from the unit, who ran to hug him. Others joined in, and soon the group was together, swapping stories and memories as if no time had passed. Amid the laughter and hugs, Jason noticed something different about some of his colleagues. Several of them were accompanied by service dogs, just like Axel. But unlike Jason, most of them seemed uncomfortable talking about their recent travels. It was then that Jason brought up the subject. "Has anyone else had problems with the airlines because of their dogs?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual but attentive to reactions. The silence that followed was revealing. One by one, his friends began to share stories similar to Jason's. Mike was the first. "Man, the last time they almost barred me from boarding. They said my dog was too big for the cabin. I got so frustrated that I had to take another flight and missed my connection." Another veteran, Carlos, shook his head in agreement. "That happened to me too. They don't seem to respect us and what we've been through. These dogs aren't just animals. They're our lifeline." Jason listened to each account, feeling his indignation grow. Everyone there had given so much for their country, and now they were being treated with disrespect, as if their dogs were a burden. Axel, lying at Jason's feet, seemed to sense the tension around him, his eyes alert to any change in the environment. It was at this moment that an idea began to form in Jason's mind. He knew he couldn't just accept this situation. Something had to be done. His friends, who had faced real battles alongside him, were now facing a new struggle, and this time, they weren't armed for it. "We need to do something about this," said Jason, with determination in his voice. "We can't let them keep treating us like this. These dogs are essential to our health, our safety." The other veterans agreed, and it was there, in that reunion, that the seed of a campaign began to germinate. Jason knew it would be an uphill battle, but he was prepared. Axel raised his head and looked at Jason, as if he understood the weight of the moment. Jason took a deep breath. It was time to fight again, this time for a cause that affected not only him, but all the veterans who depended on their service dogs. In the days following the reunion, the idea of a campaign to defend the rights of veterans and their service dogs began to take shape. Jason, motivated by his friends' stories and his own frustrating experience at the airport, set about organizing the next steps. The phone kept ringing, and emails were coming in all the time from other veterans telling similar stories. It seemed that the problem was bigger than he had imagined. Then, one sunny afternoon, while Jason was going through his campaign notes at his home in California, the phone rang again. It was an unexpected call. General Thompson, his former superior during his time in the service, wanted to speak to him. "Jason," began the general in a firm but friendly voice, "I've heard about your campaign and what you're trying to do for veterans. I'm impressed by your initiative, and I've been through it too, with my service dog." Jason was silent for a moment, surprised. He had never known that General Thompson also had a service dog. "Sir, it's an honor to know that you support what we're trying to do," he said gratefully. "More than support, Jason. I want to get involved. I want you to join forces with our new initiative at the Department of Defense to improve the lives of veterans suffering from PTSD and other traumas. You have a clear vision and you're fighting for something fair. Let's make this something bigger." Jason was speechless for a moment. Not only was he receiving support from a superior he respected, but he also had the opportunity to take his campaign to a national level. "I accept, sir," he finally said with determination. With the support of General Thompson and other military authorities, Jason's campaign began to gain traction. It wasn't long before the media began to notice the story. Rachel, the journalist who had witnessed the incident at the airport, published a story about the event, highlighting the importance of service dogs for veterans and the challenges they faced on airlines. The story quickly went viral, attracting the attention of major media outlets. Jason began giving interviews, always accompanied by Axel. In each one, he explained the importance of these animals and how the current system was failing to recognize their rights. The campaign, which began with a small group of veterans, was now a national movement with growing popular support. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Soon, the airlines began to react. Some of them claimed that in-flight animal policies needed to be restricted for the safety of all passengers. The conflict was on. Jason knew he was entering a new battle. Meetings with representatives of the airline industry began to be arranged, and he knew that this war would not be won without a fight. But he was not alone. At every step, Axel was by his side, and the support of the veterans and the public only grew. Meanwhile, an unexpected surprise happened. Robert, the executive who had helped Jason and Axel at the airport, got in touch again. He revealed something that would change the course of the campaign. "Jason, I have to tell you something. My son is a veteran, and he also depends on a service dog. I've never talked about this before, but your cause has touched me personally. I'm on your side in this fight. If you need anything, you can count on me." With this support, Jason felt he was on the right track. The movement was growing, and the tide was turning in their favor. But he knew that the challenges were far from over. The airlines would continue to resist, and the real battle was just beginning. As the movement gained momentum and the pressure on the airlines increased, Jason began to realize that the fight for policy change wouldn't just be fought in the media spotlight. What had once been a fair battle for rights was now turning into something much darker and more dangerous. The first hint of this came one quiet morning when Jason and his family started receiving anonymous threats. It all started with a simple letter left in the mailbox without a sender. The content was brief, but to the point. "Quit your campaign. Stop now, or you and your family will pay the price." Jason, a man used to danger because of his time in the Navy, initially ignored the warning. He was used to facing far greater challenges than empty threats. However, as the movement grew, the letters became more frequent and more aggressive. Some referred to personal information about his family, which began to make Jason more and more alert. His wife, Sarah, and their children began to express concern. "Jason, maybe it's time to slow down a bit," Sarah suggested nervously after reading one of the most recent threats. "I'm scared of what these people might do." Jason held her hand firmly, trying to convey the security that even he himself didn't fully feel. They want to intimidate us, but we can't back down. We're doing this for ourselves and for all the veterans who depend on these dogs." Axel, as always, stood next to Jason, apparently calm, but something in his posture indicated that he too felt the tension building. But what started out as letters turned into something much more frightening. One evening, while Jason was out in the yard with Axel, the dog started sniffing at something unusual near the fence. He started digging, growling low, his whole body on alert. Jason went closer and, shining a flashlight on the spot, noticed something that made his heart race. A small hidden camera, disguised among the plants. Someone was spying on his house. Jason immediately called the police, but the officers were unable to identify the person responsible for the camera. This only increased his discomfort and the feeling that something much bigger was at stake. He knew he couldn't leave his family exposed to this kind of danger. That night, Jason couldn't sleep. He wondered how far the airlines and their allies were willing to go to stop the campaign. He knew that the policies he was trying to change affected the profits of these large corporations, but spying on him? That was a level of threat he had never imagined. The next day, Jason decided to hire a private investigator to find out the source of the threats and the spying. The result of the investigations was shocking. The trails led directly to senior officials at one of the airlines he was fighting against. What was initially a campaign to secure rights had turned into a large-scale conspiracy to intimidate and silence him. Despite the threats, Jason felt more determined than ever. "If they're willing to go this far to stop us, it means we're close to making a real difference," he told Sarah, trying to convince her and himself that they were on the right track. With this new information, Jason and his lawyers took the evidence to the media. The revelation that a major airline was behind the threats sparked a national scandal. Employees were fired, and the pressure on the airlines only increased. Axel, as always, was by Jason's side every step of the way. The dog, who had saved him countless times, now became a symbol of courage and resilience for everyone who followed the movement. But Jason knew that the worst was yet to come. He could sense that the final battle would be the hardest of all. After the scandal involving the threats and the dismissal of employees, Jason was called to a meeting with senior airline executives. It was a golden chance to discuss the changes he and the veterans had been demanding for so long. He knew it would be a decisive meeting, but also an opportunity to expose all the injustices he and so many others had suffered. The meeting took place in an imposing corporate building with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. When Jason arrived, accompanied by his lawyer and, of course, Axel, he noticed the tension in the air. Across the table were some of the most powerful men in the airline industry, all with serious and cautious expressions. Jason sat calmly, caressing Axel, who was sitting at his feet, always attentive. He began the meeting by presenting all the evidence of mistreatment, the difficulties veterans faced boarding their service dogs, and the vital importance of these animals to their owners' mental and emotional recovery. During the presentation, he noticed that most of the executives were silent, some even uncomfortable. But it wasn't until one of the executives, the same Robert who had helped Jason at the airport months ago, took the floor that the meeting took an unexpected turn. "Gentlemen, Jason is right," Robert began, looking at his colleagues. "My own son relies on a service dog to deal with the trauma he's carried since returning from war. If we want to maintain our image as an industry that looks after its passengers, we have to ensure that people like Jason and his son get the respect and support they deserve." This unexpected support changed the mood in the room. The debate was intense, but in the end it was clear that the airlines would have to reform their policies. It was announced that a national audit would be conducted to review the rules for transporting service dogs and ensure that companies respected veterans' rights. As the campaign gained more and more momentum, Jason faced a personal challenge that almost crumbled him. Axel, his faithful companion, began to show signs of illness. The dog, who had been his mainstay for so many years, seemed to be losing his vitality. Jason, terrified at the thought of losing his friend, took Axel to several specialists. The vets discovered that Axel had a serious but treatable condition, and thanks to the success of the campaign, Jason now had the resources to pay for treatment. The following days were difficult, with Jason accompanying Axel through every stage of his recovery. He spent hours by the dog's side in the veterinary hospital, repaying all the loyalty Axel had shown him. Fortunately, with time, Axel began to improve. Seeing his companion on his feet again, ready to face the world by his side, was one of the most emotional moments of Jason's life. With Axel recovered and at his side, Jason continued the fight. The campaign that began with a few veterans was now expanding to the whole country. Other veterans support groups joined the movement, and the media continued to cover the case intensely. Jason was invited to speak at conferences, TV shows, and eventually received a call that would change everything: an invitation to the White House. The President of the United States wanted to meet with Jason to discuss new policies to support veterans, not only in relation to service dogs, but also in relation to mental health care and family support. Jason could hardly believe it. When he and Axel walked through the gates of the White House, he felt like his mission was finally coming true. The meeting with the president was emotional, and Jason was recognized as a key voice in the fight for veterans' rights. As he left the meeting, he was greeted by a crowd of journalists and supporters who cheered him on.